Welcome. Welcome.
The Internet was originally created by a government defense agency, but it quickly became a platform for the growth of a new industry worldwide, offering a wide range of attractive products and services. As the web became popular with hundreds of millions of users, intelligence agencies like the NSA decided to use it for its own purposes. An instrument for global communication soon became a tool for massive spying, part of a surveillance industrial complex. The vast super-secret National Security Agency took to the Internet like a fish takes to water. There is an often invisible but deep connection between a high-tech government intelligence service and the corporate world, as well as tensions between the companies, their customers, and the government. It works on many levels. First, the intelligence agency works with thousands of businesses who offer services and provide contractors. Some of the big ones are on an NSA advisory panel, and others are deeply complicit with its global spying and surveillance mission. At the same time that many are criticizing government spying, customers are pressuring their phone and internet companies, accusing them of violating their privacy. Here's one case, documented in this chart shown in a lawsuit, proving that AT&T set up a special room to intercept calls the government wanted to spy on. All of this collusion upsets the CEO of another tech company, Roy Singham of ThoughtWorks.
The sad part about this is it's really something that has undermined commerce, it's undermined privacy, it's undermined security. It is so hypocritical what these companies and governments have done to something that could have been so revolutionary, so important to the human race, this globalization of an internet economy. And it's been destroyed, quite frankly, by this collaboration.
The NSA is proud of its partnerships with many companies, as these documents, released by Edward Snowden, makes clear. The agency has made deals with corporations to provide data in exchange for information on threats against their operations, as these formerly secret documents show. This relationship is documented in journalist Glenn Greenwald's book, No Place to Hide. This leaked graphic refers to what NSA calls strategic partnerships, 80 major global corporations in all, including well-known computer, telephone, and internet companies. This graphic outlines the specific targets of NSA collection: email, video and voice chats, photos, stored data, and more. This document for fiscal year 2012 shows a 32% increase in cooperation from over 45,000 companies. The agency reports a strong growth in data from Google, up 63%, Facebook, up 131%, and Skype, up 248%. We asked NSA whistleblower Russ Tice about these partnerships.
It seems as if a lot of the technology companies are actually being paid to share their, quote, data with the NSA.
Absolutely, and in some respects, I have a little bit of sympathy for some of these companies because it's a carrot and a stick. Now, the carrot is, oh, by the way, we're going to pay you millions and tens of millions of dollars and beef up your bottom line for this information. The stick is, if you don't give us the information, we're going to make life miserable for you. We're going to cut back on your government contracts, and as the CEO of Quest Communications found out, we're going to put you in jail if we can find some nitty-gritty thing that we can pin on you. And I think he just got out of jail just a couple months ago.
Companies are often ordered to supply information for which they are paid. This is an actual court document showing that NSA requests to a foreign intelligence surveillance court results in orders to the company. The companies like this process because they can then claim they are being forced to cooperate and not because of all the money they make.
So in other words, there is intimidation, actually. This is really almost mafia-like.
Absolutely. This is extortion and blackmail.
But some of these companies engage in spying themselves. Challenges to Google's use of Street View cars seems on its way to the Supreme Court. Their role has the attention of Martin Smith, a producer at the PBS Frontline program. Smith says that businesses in Silicon Valley helped create the surveillance state.
That the cell phone that you carry tracks everything, everywhere you go. It increasingly tracks what you buy. Your email is scanned so that advertisements can be placed, but it's creating a turnkey surveillance state that is that everybody is participating in. It's not just journalists and their sources, but everybody is exposed. Their information, Google knows more about you than any institution on the planet at this point.
But these companies want you to sign privacy agreements. They claim to be protecting your privacy.
Well, they are. They do have privacy agreements, and if you took the time to read them, perhaps you could make a rational decision, but you'd never get out of your house. You'd be there reading these privacy agreements for months on end.
Alfredo Lopez runs an internet business to empower citizens.
You're a customer of a company, you sign a privacy agreement with them. They want you to, they have an implied contract with you to actually ensure that your data is treated confidentially and private.
Right.
But they've broken that, haven't they, many of them?
They've broken it, and they also, you have to really be careful. Google collaborates with the U.S. government. It's on a bunch of committees with the U.S. government, and its privacy and data protection agreement has more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese. So they can do literally anything they want with your data. In fact, Google writes into its Gmail agreement the ability to actually read your email. They claim it's for marketing purposes. But the same apparatus they use to read your email can also be used by some government official to figure out what it is you're talking about, and who it is you're talking to.
So this is a battleground, isn't it? Between the desire of people to communicate without being spied on and the insistence by the government to spy on them.
That is correct.
The companies require privacy agreements like these that customers think protect them. But many of these agreements are written by lawyers who know how to conceal or sanitize their real meaning. The language is deceptive, writes critic Wolf Richter. They're all doing it. They're part of the enormously hyped bubble of big data, whose business model is to collect and monetize your personal information, which has become part of a new asset class. And seeing this, the NSA is dying of data envy. At the same time, initially at least, most of the big companies would not discuss their involvement or deny it. Larry Page of Google said, press reports that suggest that Google is providing open-ended access to our users' data are false, period. Facebook's chief security officer Joe Sullivan said, we do not provide any government organization with direct access to Facebook's servers. Later, Mashable reported Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and other tech giants knew of the existence of the secret NSA surveillance program, PRISM. NSA's general counsel says tech companies were aware of PRISM, they just didn't know it was called that.
Early on in the debate, there were some statements by companies who may or may not have been involved in the program saying, well, we never heard of PRISM. But whether they ever heard of PRISM, any company that was from whom information was being obtained under 702 knew that it was being obtained.
Correct. PRISM is just an internal government term that as a result of the leaks became a public term, but collection under this program is done pursuant to compulsory legal process that any recipient company would have received.
According to Tom Gelton, a correspondent for National Public Radio, the NSA and many companies signed on to an ESF, Enduring Security Framework, to work together in a mutually rewarding way.
As part of what's called the Enduring Security Framework, chief executives of top U.S. corporations are brought to Washington 2 or 3 times a year for a one-day classified briefing For each session, the CEOs get special top-secret clearances so they can be told about the latest in cyber weaponry. They can then go back to their companies and take steps to deal with the threats they hear about, threats they may not previously have taken seriously.
Suddenly, tech companies began spending millions to boost their images.
Right now, we exist in a surveillance state. I have no doubt in my own mind that we have, the corporate players and the government spies had put in place a mechanism where they can monitor almost everything at real time. And to assume that our secret policies, which are judged by courts that are secret, and issue mandates that are secret, to believe that this secret mechanism will safeguard us from devolving into a police state, I think is really the height of recklessness.
Al Jazeera published emails showing a close personal relationship between Google execs and NSA. No wonder journalist Glenn Greenwald says,
there almost is no division between the private sector and the NSA or the private sector and the Pentagon when it comes to the American national security state. They really are essentially one.
Here's just one list of NSA private contractors.
And this goes back before 9/11. That NSA was increasingly, in the internet age, was increasingly going out to the defense, military industrial defense intelligence complex and granting very, very large contract vehicles in the billions and billions of dollars to quote unquote solve the big data problem, to solve the intelligence problem of the digital age.
Former NSA executive Thomas Drake told us a less expensive in-house surveillance program was later junked and replaced by one built by a private contractor, SAIC, at a much higher cost.
The dark secret, right, which I've continued to talk about, is that the very best of American engineering innovation had already solved the problem. They just chose to ignore it. One particular program was called Thin Thread, and it was developed for just over $3 million, but it didn't stand a chance against a program called Trailblazer, which was $4 billion, when it was awarded with great fanfare as a flywheel contract, the flagship program in which it would take NSA into the digital age. And that was in the spring of 2000. In fact, I was, again, told by the number 3 who I reported to, it says, you got to be at least 10 million to even get noticed. And 2, Thin Thread came out of there was a signals, we call it Signals Intelligence Automation Research Center, otherwise known as SARC, it was really a center of excellence.
But it was internal.
Internal, had about a dozen people, right? And guess what?
It was replaced by a
$4
billion project.
That $4 billion project had been already awarded. It was the corporate solution. You did not challenge the corporate solution. Even though the acquisition regulations, the contract regs, require you to determine if there are any alternatives or existing solutions that meet the requirements. Because you're outsourcing. This was a choice, another critical strategic decision that was made by General Hayden, which was we're going to buy the solution, not make it. There was no in between.
Working for spy agencies can become a company's profit center. The conglomerate that Edward Snowden worked for reportedly made over $1 billion servicing defense agencies like NSA.
Silicon Valley is escalating pressure on President Barack Obama to curb the U.S. government surveillance programs that vacuum personal information off the internet and threaten the technology industry's financial livelihood. A coalition that includes Google, Apple, Yahoo, Facebook, and Microsoft lashed out in an open letter printed Monday in major newspapers. The crusade united 8 companies that often compete fiercely against each other, but now find themselves banding together to limit the potential damage from revelations about the National Security Agency's snooping on web surfers.
As exposés of the corporate role mounted, foreign companies no longer wanted to do business in America.
There are reports rolling in saying that U.S. businesses are feeling fallout overseas from the NSA spying revelations. You normally wouldn't make the connection, but other countries are actually thinking twice now about buying goods that are made by U.S. companies.
Even Julian Assange of WikiLeaks commented on how American companies were being hurt.
You know, I've been involved in the tech industry for a long time. I know my friends in the US are really hurting as a result of of what has happened in the NSA. As far as the outside world is concerned, the United States has become an archipelago of coercion, where any person you were dealing with in business at Google or Facebook or Yahoo or at a telecommunications company might have become secretly an agent of the National Security Agency because they're ordered to do so by the FISA court, and they're forced to keep that secret or through the mechanism of national security letters.
One study reported that the U.S. cloud computing industry could lose as much as $36 billion in business. Even as companies challenged NSA access, a top-secret court that oversees surveillance has time and time again ruled for the NSA. Some companies like Microsoft published a secret internal manual to show employees how to cooperate with government requests. This one was leaked. This manual shows that the company set up a special portal for government agencies to make requests. Google decided to publicize the growing number of requests for information they were receiving to show how transparent they are. Then, for PR reasons, many companies began pressuring the government publicly to reform NSA.
You know, so frankly, I think that the government blew it, right? I think that they blew it on communicating what they were, basically the balance of what they were going for here with this. So, you know, the morning after this started breaking, there were like a bunch of people asked them what they thought, and the government's comment was, "Oh, don't worry. Basically, we're not spying on any Americans." Right? And it was like, "Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's like that's really helpful to companies who are trying to serve people around the world and really going to inspire confidence in American internet companies. It's like thanks for going out there and being really clear about what you're doing." So I think that was really bad.
Some companies are now defying the NSA. Others say the government is irresponsibly blaming them unfairly. The tech industry is less thrilled that the White House is shining a light on their data collection practices through its big data report. Companies issued statements urging the White House to turn its attention back to how the NSA collects private data. Criticizing them, they say, is irresponsible.
I mean, we haven't had this kind of arrogance of American corporate government language, in my opinion, since the 50s. You know, when what's good for General Motors is good for America. And I think it's time that the businesses in the rest of the world took notice of this monopolization by U.S. corporations and said, this is not good for our countries, it's not good for our clients, it's not good for our customers, it's not good for the world.
At the same time, they have made videos like this to show the public how they handle requests for information on their customers.
In the course of a criminal investigation, sometimes the government requests information on Google users. Here's how we protect users' information from excessive requests, while also following the law. Let's say the federal authorities want information from Google about user HughDunnit22. Google protects your rights by upholding the Fourth Amendment. The law requires authorities to use a search warrant when seeking private content, like email. If there's enough evidence to support an application for a search warrant, the investigator heads to court. The judge inspects the application, and if satisfied, issues a search warrant.
To Alfredo Lopez, videos like this give the impression that these companies are being sensitive to customer concerns.
They say a range of things. Most of the time, the people that we interact with and the bodies that I'm with, and when I go to different activities, with hotsy-totsy people where they pay for your lunch and dinner, they say, "You're right, Alfredo, and we're working on that." Or it's another. See, everything is so compartmentalized and divided that it's a self-protection. They can protect themselves. They also, here is the problem. To see the picture this way, you have to have the politics to see the picture. And that's what I keep saying to people that I talk to all the time.
I think as somebody in the tech sector, something that's more upsetting to me is the lack of vigilance in the first place of the corporations and their hypocrisy in the defense of this, and they have no real plan to put pressure on the United States government or international bodies to protect their other citizens. Listen, we're a global business. You know, I operate in 30 countries. We have people working, I think, in 15 countries right now. We have consumers, we have businesses in all these countries. Most global businesses do. Whom am I accountable to? Am I not accountable to my client in India or to my client in South Africa? Of course I am. You can't pretend that you like global business and then you think it's okay that one country and one set of companies, corporations, have this unlimited license to exploit and spy on the rest of the world.
You cannot proceed from the premise that the government has the right to conduct surveillance against you or anyone else. It does not have that right under the Constitution of the United States. It says it clearly. And, you know, all this stuff about, well, we have to surveil criminals and terrorists and everything. How do you know someone's a criminal? And how do you know someone's a terrorist? Why are you taking my email?
If these companies can collect this information, so can the government.
Martin Smith's Frontline series exposed corporate collusion with the NSA.
The Googles, the Facebooks collect as much of our sensitive data as possible.
But anything you hand to a private company is potentially government.
The NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone.
Corporate America and national security state know so much about us, and we know so little about them.
I do see it as one of the stories of our time. It affects us all here as to whether or not we're going to be adequately informed about what our government is doing. And we do have a First Amendment of free speech and a Fourth Amendment that need on search and seizure. We need protections. They need to be upheld.
Donald Byrd teaches journalism at Long Island University. He says not all of his students even recognize the problem.
Our students think that the internet is just a utility. You turn it on and it runs, it's water, electricity, whatever, and the internet really has to be the same. And they're on their machines all the time. I took a train to Chicago and back recently because my son's at Northwestern University, and the kids, they're all on their screens. They're not talking to each other. They're never going to meet a significant other.
Many of them may not know, may not care that other people are paying attention to what they're actually saying, or they're recording what they're saying. They're being monitored, they're being spied on.
I know that. I tell them that when I go into my Bank of America, there are 14 cameras on me, watching me. There are cameras everywhere, we know that, and so forth. And I tell them never to text anything they wouldn't want their mother to read.
Is privacy dead then? I mean, personal privacy?
I think so. I think it is.
So in a sense, the NSA, by its desire to control everything, has actually led to the global resistance to it.
This is about economic, military, political, ideological, historical control. This is the fundamental nature of power in the world. Whoever controls the commanding heights of the new world economy, which is the internet, dominates the economic landscape for the next 50 years, then dominates the politics, and with that they dominate the political and military narrative. My sister is a historian, and others have told me that when you have a chance to rewrite history, you control the future. This is also about changing the history of the past. That's dangerous. Victors write history. If we're not careful, we're going to create a situation where the history of the people who fought in the civil rights movement, that's going to be obliterated. How did Nelson Mandela go to prison? It was the American deputy ambassador who turned him in. Those facts of history will be conveniently discarded if we're not careful. And that's what's at stake. The future of history and the future of knowledge.
Coming up next, combating insider threats. The National Security Agency was set up to keep America safe.
People you know from within our organization can also cause harm. This threat is called the insider threat. An insider is a trusted member of our organization, such as an employee or contractor that intentionally causes harm.
It now seems obsessed with keeping itself safe.
If you see the following behavior, you should report it immediately to your supervisor or our security team.
Among the threats NSA and other government agencies are now facing are not the ones they first expected or prepared for. insider threats. The NSA estimates that as many as 4,000 employees may not be trustworthy.
I was considered a rising star in my office, so it wasn't like I was the disgruntled employee.
Former NSA staffer Russ Tice says that after 9/11, the agency slowly turned on itself.
Matter of fact, when all this happened, my supervisor didn't even know what was going on. So when they yanked me out of my office, my supervisor was shocked and had no clue what was going on. So this insider thing that they're talking about, having basically employees snoop on other employees, that environment did not exist then.
But yet you must have been shocked to be singled out this way and be investigated.
I was, and they called me in for an emergency psych eval, and they bring this thing up and they say that I'm crazy because I think there could be a spy in the intelligence business, Lord forbid.
Here at their headquarters at Fort Meade in Maryland, the NSA mothership is well guarded in a cocoon of security against danger. Now, like other intelligence agencies, they are increasingly uptight, forcing employees to spy on each other. Here's an advisory from the U.S. Navy. NSA is run by a Navy admiral.
This is an unclassified brief on the insider threat. What is an insider threat? An insider who uses his or her access to harm national security interests or national security through unauthorized disclosure, data modification, espionage, or actions resulting in loss or degradation of resources or capabilities.
Here's another video, a dramatization produced for Homeland Security.
Would you recognize these situations as potential threats if they happen to you? Ted has been employed at his firm for 6 years. His firm's approaching a major security upgrade that has kept him working late into the evening, so he uses his lunch break to run a few errands close by the office. As he talks on his cell and walks back to his office, Ted notices a coworker, Doug Redman. Doug appears to have just handed a bulky folder to a man and then walked away.
This is a call for vigilance. If you see something, say something is its mantra. One unintended byproduct is that alarmist messages like this can intimidate employees into silence.
An unusual or alarming confluence of these situations may indicate a threat. You have the power to protect your workplace. If you see something suspicious from one of your coworkers, say something to your supervisor, human resources department, or your security officer.
Another insider who became a whistleblower says he was tagged when he began raising questions about spying on Americans. Former NSA executive Thomas Drake was threatened with prison.
Well, I was tagged early on as a problem because I was raising the gravest of concerns about NSA conduct shortly after 9/11. When I had that extraordinary encounter with the lead attorney in the Office of General Counsel, he said some very dark things in terms of what I was asking. I was saying, why are we in violation of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act? It has criminal sanctions. He says, you don't understand. The lawyers, all the lawyers have looked at it. It's all, and the White House has approved it. And then he said the following, which threw me right back to the Nixon administration. It's all legal. And as soon as he said it's all legal, the hair standing up on the back of my neck, because this is precisely what Nixon separated himself from the special oath that he took, which is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution.
Both Drake and Tice tried to bring their concerns to the agency's attention, but got nowhere.
There's been a lot of buzz from some pundits on television saying, well, Snowden should have gone inside and shared his concerns instead of going to the public with these secret documents.
Those avenues don't exist. That chain of command, the DOD IG, NSA's IG was totally in bed with the security office in the front office at Fort Meade at NSA. That's why I didn't even go to them. Matter of fact, back then I was friends with the deputy director of NSA. And I went to him, and he kind of acted like he didn't know what was going on when I talked to him very quietly in private. So I went to the DOD IG, I got nowhere. I went to the Merit System Protection Board only because I was a military veteran. If I wasn't a military veteran, they would have blown me off for that, because the intelligence service is exempt from the laws, from the Whistleblower Protection Act. They're exempt, and that's something you don't hear from these pundits when they're talking. They don't even bring that up. I don't even know if they know it themselves, but the Whistleblower Protection Act does not protect someone in the intelligence community.
What about Thomas Drake?
I became a whistleblower, and what I did in those weeks, months, and the next few years after 9/11 was use every available channel that was within the government to blow the whistle. And that included inside NSA, that included the Office of General Counsel, that included the Inspector General's office, that included obviously my supervisory chain.
Well, you did what you were supposed to do.
That included Congress, Department of Defense, and a number of others.
You did what you were supposed to do, go through channels, and Snowden didn't, and they're criticizing Snowden for not going through channels.
Well, he actually did go through channels. He's actually elaborated more on that in terms of detail. It's just that it never got anywhere.
Since our interview with Drake, Snowden spoke with NBC and revealed that he also tried to communicate with the NSA.
Now, I had raised these complaints not just officially, in writing, through email, to these offices and these individuals, but to my supervisors, to my colleagues, in more than one office. I did it in Fort Meade, I did it in Hawaii.
The NSA downplayed Snowden's charges, insisting they could only find one email of his. Later, NBC challenged that response and confirmed Snowden's story.
Look, the lawyer that I confronted in the Office of General Counsel, he warned me. He said, don't ask any more questions. You don't want to go there. And I chose to fight from within. Look, I was now eyewitness to the subversion of the Constitution. I was literally, my oath is on the line. I was not going to violate that oath. I was going to keep faith and allegiance to the oath. That oath is support and defend the Constitution. It's the idea of how to govern ourselves, for all of its faults and foibles. Okay, historically, it is.
But you were
the basis.
warned, Tom.
I was warned. Yes, I was.
And
but I wasn't going to stand silent and look away because I'd be complicit.
Unlike Drake and other whistleblowers, Snowden released secret NSA documents. He decided that the only way to challenge them was to show the public what NSA was doing in its own words. Snowden didn't just dump secret documents to get them out. He sought out responsible journalists like Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and tried to put them in context. He asked them to protect the names of agents. At first, Greenwald was too busy to encrypt his communications with Snowden and almost didn't get his big scoop.
The lesson of that story, and the reason why I've proudly told it, is twofold. One is that here was somebody who, in retrospect, for very good reasons, was afraid to talk to me as a source, coming to a journalist, because he knew, unlike me at the time, the vast reach of this surveillance system. And so he would not talk to me or tell me anything about who he was or what he had until I installed encryption. And that's the broader point, is we talk a lot about the threat to privacy from the surveillance state, but how do you have a free press and engage in a healthy news gathering process when the government is monitoring people's communications and even collecting lists of everyone with whom we're communicating? And it sort of underscored the difficulty of doing journalism and speaking freely in an unencrypted environment.
Ironically, the NSA had for years lobbied to block encryption on the internet so they could more easily collect information. This very lack of protection later made it easier for Snowden to download their files, what is estimated at over 1 million documents, maybe more. Only Snowden knows for sure.
The NSA was engaged in things like dumbing down encryption. Making sure that encryption wasn't as strong as it could be so they could break it. And then they complain that there's a cybersecurity issue out there. Well, of course there's a cybersecurity issue because they've created a cybersecurity issue, building back doors into all these software programs.
The government was soon cracking down. Here's what happened to Thomas Drake after an article appeared exposing the NSA.
And as I found out later, then Vice President Cheney had simply issued the call, find and fry the perpetrator, whoever, just find and fry. I don't care who it is, make an object lesson of them.
Find and fry.
Find and fry. So it's 2005. They launched, the article comes out, they launch this massive leak investigation. I knew when the article came out, no doubt there would be investigation. When the investigation was launched, I'd get caught up in it. Why? Very few people knew about the secret surveillance programs. They had really...
So what happens to you one morning at your house?
Well, it's now almost 2 years later, and I'm getting ready to go to work. It's November 28th. It's shortly after 7 a.m. I look out the window and I see all these FBI agents streaming across the front yard. And of course, my heart's in my throat, and the nightmare had begun. I was facing 35 years in prison. 5 counts for espionage, 1 for obstruction of justice, 4 for making false statements to FBI agents. And now my name is splashed all over mainstream media and the alternative media.
Guilty?
Guilty in the court of public opinion at that time, because it was so rare for an American to be charged with espionage.
In the end, Drake was allowed to plead to a minor infraction and the charges were dropped. Russ Tice, who also challenged surveillance, was under surveillance.
I have the FBI following me around. At first it was the black sedans, and then I got to a point almost where it's like every black sedan I saw, I thought that's probably an FBI guy, and you got to get it. I realized I had to get out of that mentality too, because they're there, but not everybody out there is one of them. So, and I learned how to spot them. And now the shining knight in armor is Ed Snowden, because what he was willing to do, the rest of us were not. Was he was willing to fall on his own sword to do it. And we were not, mainly with the documentation that he's provided, because he's provided the proof. Their documentation he's provided, which proves all the rest of us to be correct. And they cannot refute it now. They cannot.
So that took a lot of guts, and he was asked, what do you think is going to happen to you? And he said NG, standing for not good. He seems to be aware of the dangerous position he's in.
Well, yeah, especially if he looked at what happened to Mr. Drake, and anytime you put documents out there, and I find this interesting because I've been on TV shows from way back, and they look at me and they say, "Oh yeah, you can say that, but where's your proof? Where's your proof?" I said, okay, if I were to pull out the documentation right now, and it had a bunch of classification lines on it, and I could prove it with the documentation right here at this table, do you think that I'd make it out of this building without being shackled?
Motivated employees join institutions because they believe in their mission, but often when exposed to abuses, they turn on their agencies and become insider threats. How do they keep all these people in intelligence in line? We asked intelligence analyst Brad Summerall, who, like Ed Snowden, was an online network administrator, but in the military cleared for top-secret information. What did he think drove Snowden to rebel?
Something got to him, He was working in the NSA office, where he also saw a lot of those things happen. Just like in the Marine Corps, you end up in the field out in, the field where you see other things happen. Some things get to you, some things don't. I'd imagine he had seen enough material that for whatever reason he felt he was upon himself that he was going to do what he was going to do.
To share it with the American people in some way.
Yeah, and jump ship at the same time.
Yeah. But I guess it was a challenging and kind of gutsy or crazy thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
But when people are on the inside, a lot of the people who are actually doing the technical jobs don't necessarily believe in a mission in terms of, that what they're doing is really protecting the American people sometimes. They feel like they begin to question it, let's say.
Well, I think it's sometimes, depending on what situation you're in, you might begin to question yourself. Everybody found it a little bit curious that he did it with his position. He was taken care of very well. There was a lot of other people working for the government that didn't get making nearly that, and would have certainly never have done it at the same time. I just think he felt he was removed in some way. That's about the only thing that I can imagine. Just a disconnect.
Right now they have going on what they call the insider threat program, where they're like terrified. 4,000 people on the list of potential insider threats. Seems to be a lot of paranoia in that world too.
Yeah, a lot. A lot of big checks were written in 2002.
Big checks.
Meaning money. You gave a lot of people a lot of jobs, and when you give somebody a job to do, they're going to do their job. They overstaffed a lot, over technology, over everything. So you just got all this big money thrown in one direction, and everybody has to justify their cost.
Has all this money resulted in enhanced security? You would think so, but the former director of NSA, General Alexander, says that the U.S. is more at risk today than ever, perhaps because they overexpanded with inexperienced and overpaid people. He told an Australian newspaper, quote, "We're at greater risk. I can't measure it. You can't say, well, is that enough to get through? I don't know." If he doesn't know, who does? His solution, more spying. With so many people on the payroll, it's hard to control everyone. Staff members are not encouraged to think independently. The NSA has to keep track of them as well as the people they are spying on. Compounding the problem, NSA has outsourced, in effect privatized, so many of its programs, reports James Bamford, who writes about NSA. Quote, "The Snowden case demonstrates the potential risks involved when a nation turns its spying and eavesdropping over to companies with lax security and inadequate personnel policies." In any other country, the spying issue would be relegated to politics and the law. But in America, it has been embraced by popular culture, turning Snowden into a celebrity with his face on buses, comic books, and now action figures. Already, there are 2 Hollywood movies planned about his escapades. More ominous than the risks whistleblowers face are what's happened to the many victims of covert U.S. foreign policies, whose fate has often been buried in secret documents that no one ever sees. That's why this National Security Archive exists, a not-for-profit library of formerly secret documents that details the hidden history of U.S. covert policy. Archive Director Tom Blanton showed us around their facility at George Washington University, just a few miles from the offices of the officials who initially kept these documents from being seen. We sat down in a room packed with boxes of formerly secret files.
We've been doing this for almost 30 years, and these are the documents that are still in paper form. Now, almost everything we get, we get it digitally or we convert it to digital as soon as it comes in the door.
So this is the real underlying documentation of scandals that most Americans don't even remember.
Well, every few years, the meteor hits the Yucatan or a window pops open of scandal, and then people go, wow, really? That's what you see back there? That's what's happening right now with Edward Snowden. It's sort of like the curtain came up and we were, really? Is that what's going on back there?
Snowden's courage in releasing these documents has introduced maybe a whole new generation, perhaps through the mass media, the American people, once again, to what their government is doing in their name.
I think the real impact of those Snowden revelations was to show a series of lies by the government. I mean, if you went through the Church Committee investigations or Iran-Contra, you're used to the fact that the government can routinely lie. But I think on this surveillance stuff, to have the head of national intelligence look into the camera and say, no, sir, we're not collecting data on millions of Americans. 2 months later, it turns out he's lying through his teeth.
If the American people really knew and understood what was going on, they wouldn't support it.
That's an open question, because the main thing the American people seem not to support of all this surveillance was just the hoovering up of all the phone calls, the big metadata collection system where every phone call for the last 5 to 8 years sits to, from, date, time, length, sits in a set of computers out at Fort Meade, Maryland. The other parts of the surveillance state, though, it seems like the American people do support or would support if it's targeted directly at keeping them safe. And I think that was the objection to the phone call program that Snowden revealed, because not only was it scooping up everything, it had no connection at all to really fighting terrorism.
You know, at the same time, we've lived in a society, and incidents like 9/11, of course, have contributed to this, that's very fearful, that's kept on the edge of, paranoia. There's always an enemy out there that's after us, that's coming after us. And many Americans are, because of that, willing to justify or finance or support efforts that actually undercut their own freedom.
Well, I think Americans got to keep asking the question, are we safer in the dark? And about these surveillance programs, we were not safer in the dark. In fact, we weren't being protected from terrorism, and the government was rapidly expanding its power and collecting everything it could.
We were also shown documents the archive now has online. They received tens of thousands of requests from researchers and the public for documents and reports. They have had up to 3 million independent views.
So we've been collecting all the documents published by anybody from the Edward Snowden leaks. So the Washington Post, Guardian, everybody, Glenn Greenwald, all the folks publishing, putting them together with the historical documents about the wiretap controversies, about the previous debates, and then publishing them. So we've done the first collection. This is about...
We can now add the National Security Archive to the other insider threats the government faces. As investigative reporters, they were once outsiders, but now they have moved inside a prestigious university to ensure that the revelations of whistleblowers become a legitimate part of history and not so easy to whitewash or forget. Today in America, nearly 5 million people have security clearances. Nearly 1 million have access to top-secret documents. It's a big industry that seems to be getting bigger every day, and yet parts of that industry are pushing back.
They are already pressing the government to disclose way more about how many times the government asks them for data, how much data they have to give over, what are the restrictions on them. We know a ton more about those transactions today after Snowden, not because Snowden leaked them, but because the companies are pushing back against the government.
The insider threat is not new or likely to disappear. Edward Snowden was not the first, nor will he be the last. And there's more to come from the documents Snowden made off with, including the names of people NSA has spied on. Even as some establishment journalists turn on Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden, former whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg, the one-time Vietnam military officer who leaked the Pentagon Papers, rush to their defense.
Well, I think he did a great benefit to this country by letting us know what the National Security Agency, the NSA, is doing for the president under both administrations, namely intervening in the privacy of every communication of every American who has an electronic device. It's very hard to imagine a democracy really surviving long with the government having that kind of ability to blackmail any given person.
Ellsberg also embraced the case of military whistleblower Bradley, now Chelsea Manning, who released secret documents and this video on alleged war crimes in Iraq.
Come on, fire.
He's a credit to human beings, as a matter of fact, for being concerned not only about American lives and American security, but about what we were doing to foreigners, to Iraqis.
Now Ellsberg and other whistleblowers have joined hands to encourage more whistleblowing through a website called exposefacts.org that can securely receive anonymous leaks, precisely what the government fears could lead to even more insider threats. That's one look into the future. Coming up next, we will have other forecasts, including Edward Snowden's, in the final episode of our documentary series, America's Surveillance State. Welcome to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, one seat of world power. Rest assured, all of the people out here are under constant video monitoring somewhere. You know, it's sunny, it's hot here outside the White House,
but it's hard to get people to tell you how they feel about the spying that's going on. Some may be afraid to speak. Others say, I can't tell you anything because I'm on vacation, so I can't think about it while I'm on vacation. Others were much more clear about their opposition to NSA spying.
It's illegal. We have rights to privacy, whether it be in public or on our computers or on our phones. The government doesn't have any right to spy on us. It needs to stop.
And yet they're doing it big time, aren't they?
Yep.
So
you can't drive through a traffic light without having 10 cameras watching you. I mean, do we not have some right to privacy, even in public? I think we do. I think our government's gone way left and way socialist.
I don't feel good about this. You know, there's a joke now that says the chancellor changed just her number of telephone. No, but without joke, it is not a good thing. One should know who are your friends, and one should know who are not your friends.
We're trying to get some people's reaction to the scandal about the NSA spying on people, if you're worried about it, concerned about it.
Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide.
Do I mind if they listen in on my conversations? Not a bit, because I don't have anything to hide.
Do you know that statement, you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide? The very statement, you have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide, was a statement directly attributed to Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda.
The reality of America's surveillance state cannot be denied. It is very real and to critics very dangerous for the future of democracy. Not only are there protests uniting right and left, but satirists like the creators of Australia's Juice News deploy a rap attack on the surveillance state.
Behold the latest weapon in the war of terror, our greatest invention since 9/11, guaranteed to keep us free and safe forever. I give you the surveillance state, ladies and generals. Our secret wires log your key style, monitor every single number on your speed dial, rewind straight to your position with facial recognition and pinpoint you within 0.03 of a mile.
While some citizens fight back against more encroachments on privacy, the NSA and its backers in the White House, Congress, and the courts are expanding their own reach, now monitoring literally trillions of messages and even using state-of-the-art facial recognition software. NSA is also building facilities to store its data, like this top-secret $1.7 billion storage center in Utah, the size of 17 football fields. It will store yottabytes, the equivalent of 500 quintillion pages of text. The war on terror seems almost self-perpetuating, along with its insatiable need for endless surveillance, even as the surveillance state is being challenged as never before. There is a political battle over the future of NSA spying, with tactics escalating on all sides. In fact, mass U.S. surveillance goes back to our war on the Philippines in 1901, when it was used to identify critics and rebels. It had a strong racial component then, and critics say it still does, especially in spying on the Muslim community, even as that seems to have abated somewhat.
The surveillance program was created 18 months after the 9/11 terror attacks. Its mission to have undercover police officers collect information about Muslim and Middle Eastern communities, eavesdropping on mosques, businesses, and restaurants. While supporters argued it was a necessary anti-terror strategy, the program, created under the watch of former Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, outraged many Muslims who believed it was a violation of civil rights.
What can stop the surveillance state? What about the courts? Adam Liptak covers the Supreme Court for the New York Times.
The press had some great victories in the 60s and 70s, and that's basically in decline. And after 9/11, and with concerns about national security, the landscape for press freedom is not great, the legal landscape.
So what can journalists do here? If they're trying to get information legitimately, the government doesn't want them to have it. that's a confrontation or a challenge. What do they do?
Well, journalists can be tough and be brave and seek out information and publish it, and unfortunately sometimes face the consequences.
Liptak speaks in terms of a balance between safeguards the government says it needs and the public's right to know. He admits his newspaper doesn't publish everything they know.
There is, on the one hand, vast overclassification, sometimes to cover up government misdeeds or embarrassing episodes. On the other hand, there are the kinds of secrets that could really endanger the nation, and finding the right line is not an easy thing.
But I mean, the New York Times published the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times is publishing, quote, the Snowden papers. Does that make you proud, or do you have concerns about that?
I'm not going to second guess the judgment of the very good editors at the New York Times, but they are judgments, and we don't publish everything that comes into our possession.
The press clearly feels constrained and so has embraced whistleblowers like Edward Snowden. Before Snowden sent NSA documents to reporters, he insisted they encrypt their emails to avoid being spied on. And he even made this video to show them how to do it.
Okay, installation's completed. Let's start the program. You have two choices, Cleopatra or GPA for new privacy assistant. You want GPA. It's better in almost every way, even though it's older. This is the interface, your keys. First thing you need to do as a new user is go to Preferences and click Advanced Mode. If you don't click this, and it's not enabled by default, you won't be able to choose your key length. You want a key that is stronger than the default length.
Andy Greenberg of Wired magazine says more and more reporters are encrypting for fear they're being spied on.
I think that's often lost as we discuss the NSA's really incredible surveillance abilities is that they're not unlimited. There are ways to evade the NSA surveillance. As Snowden himself said, crypto works. Encryption software can prevent the government, the NSA, from spying on your communications. And so I think that that's created this new renaissance in encryption tools and anonymity programs that can actually mask or hide or create a kind of bubble of privacy around your activities online. That still exists even in today's world of massive surveillance.
Crypto may have helped, but it was Snowden's bold acts that captured media attention. He was at the time only 29, a high school dropout, ending up in a $122,000 a year job. He called himself Virex, Latin for truth teller, after using the code name True Hoo-Ha. It said he spent 8 months plundering NSA secret files. The mass media is now all over the story. A survey of the LexisNexis database found NSA was mentioned only 675 times in all U.S. media in 2012. That number skyrocketed to 6,955 mentions in 2013. Earlier, media critics denounced the lack of NSA investigations by the press before Snowden's disclosures, and then meager media pickup of them afterwards. Today, there's been a renaissance of independent investigative reporting. Journalists close to Snowden, like Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, launched their own publication, The Intercept, to expose government spying. It is funded by Internet billionaire Pierre Omidyar.
We'll give our journalists everything they need to do their jobs well. The freedom to travel, legal protection when they need it, new and innovative technology, and the rarest resource of all, the time and organizational backing to develop their skills.
Omidyar is only one business leader now pushing publicly for restraints on NSA spying.
Simple example is the National Security Agency allegedly collected the phone records of every phone call of 320 million people in order to identify roughly 300 people who might be at risk. That's just bad public policy.
At the same time, civil liberties groups on the left and libertarians on the right have been pushing Congress to act because many, like the ACLU's Ben Weisner, see congressional oversight as a joke.
I think fundamentally our concern is that surveillance technologies have developed so quickly and democratic controls have been much too slow. So that's true basically in our laws that protect our privacy from surveillance, but it's also true in our oversight. I think that what we learned from the Snowden revelations is that those parts of our democracy that are supposed to do oversight over the executive branch have failed miserably. That the Congress, that the intelligence committees that are supposed to rein in and oversee the surveillance state, in fact, do the opposite. They enable it in secret.
Mr. Snowden hasn't lied to anyone. He did break his oath of office, but part of his oath of office is to the Constitution. And he believes that when James Clapper came in March, our National Director of Intelligence came and lied, that he was simply coming forward and telling the truth, that your government was lying. And this is a big concern of mine because it makes me doubt the administration and their word to us when they come and talk to us, because they have now admitted that they will lie to us if they think it's in the name of national security.
Proposed new bills would make some necessary changes to a handful of surveillance laws, but not significantly narrow the NSA's powers granted by law and presidential directives.
You know, the NSA has information now on every federal judge, on every member of Congress, on every other member of the executive branch. They may say it's just metadata, but this is the kind of information that could destroy any individual if it were put to the wrong kind of use. So I think people have reason to be worried, you know, not that our form of government is going to change overnight, but that if we don't put in the right controls, there are real threats to our way of life.
While government spying is what's being debated now, private spying is also threatening.
There are private companies gathering information about the political and protest activities of Americans on the streets of American neighborhoods across the country, and there's virtually no regulation of that activity.
There's also a private surveillance industry, isn't there?
Exactly.
I mean, with their own technologies and, you know, and in many cases you have international players like Israeli companies that are very active.
Right, and you have an infrastructure built for it. So after 9/11, the U.S. government helped fund the creation of what are called state and local intelligence fusion centers. And these fusion centers incorporate state and local law enforcement with federal law enforcement, often other state and local government entities like fire and emergency response, sometimes even utilities, private companies, and the military, all together collecting information that's collected by the local police in your neighborhood as a way to funnel it up to the intelligence community. And then they have programs like what they call the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, which sounds fine if something's suspicious, but they define what's suspicious, and they say things like videotaping, photography, note-taking, drawing diagrams, in one case, in one program, espousing extreme views.
If you see something, say something. Isn't that the big slogan here in New York?
Exactly, and what we've seen, only a relatively small number of these suspicious activity reports have been made public, but what we see is exactly what we warned they would be, that it's a proxy for racial profiling, because what's being reported isn't suspicious.
Former FBI agent Mike German doesn't dismiss fears of a police state, because he too knows from the Snowden documents that NSA shares intelligence on Americans with the FBI, a domestic law enforcement agency.
Because of my political websites, I was visited by the FBI, the United States Marshals, the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, the United States Air Force, and some other people that I don't even know. And not always, sometimes they just approached me and wanted to know, what content about my websites, what certain things meant.
Even if government surveillance is somehow restrained or curtailed, private surveillance is growing, with new spy technologies now widely available in the consumer market.
This is your family.
Here's an ad from one company that sells surveillance in the name of personal security.
And when you're not in the office, do you know what employees are doing? Does it feel like you're losing control? Introducing mSpy. mSpy is a highly advanced smartphone monitoring software that has been designed to help you mitigate risks at home or at work. Protect your kids and your loved ones from online and offline dangers. Track their location or restrict access to applications and websites. Check their SMS and phone calls. ImSpy lets you prevent risks of data leaks, monitor your employees, and keep track of their productivity in and out of the office.
Surveillance is widespread in the corporate sector, with companies spying on customers, employees, and rivals. Sam Antar worked for an electronics chain known as Crazy Eddie, which was shut down by the federal government for corrupt practices. They were using surveillance gadgets as if they were their own NSA.
My name is Sam Antar. I'm the former chief financial officer of a criminal enterprise known as Crazy Eddie's. I'm a former CPA and I am a convicted felon. Today I advise law enforcement, colleges, universities about white-collar crime.
Sam, you know, the issue of surveillance has become a big issue, but it's not a new issue, really. What have been your experiences with the surveillance state that we live in?
Back in my criminal days, let's put it this way, in every organization, whether it's a legitimate organization or a criminal organization, there are rivals vying for power. There are factions in every organization. In our criminal enterprise, which was Crazy Eddie's, my cousin Eddie used an Israeli security company to keep tabs on his rivals within the co-conspiracy.
So everyone
in other words, there was no honor among thieves.
Everyone was spying on everyone else.
Yes.
And this private surveillance, in a way, has been going on for a long time and is very pervasive. It's a big business.
Yes. It's a bigger story than the NSA story. It's really corporate surveillance of critics or corporate surveillance of rivals within their own corporations. In other words, executives surveilling rival executives.
Perhaps that's why in our age of innovation, some engineers and tech geeks are designing a new NSA surveillance-free internet. Physicists are using quantum physics to design one. Political leaders who've been spied on by the NSA, like leaders of Brazil and Germany, are encouraging this effort.
Brazil believes that the governing of the internet should be multi-sector, democratic and transparent. We consider the multilateral model to be the best way to govern it.
My belief is when you're in a difficult situation, avoid the problem, because sometimes you can't win every battle. And my belief is let's try and put our resources as corporations in the emerging sectors of the economies of the world where we're helping people with their needs and we're avoiding being part of a spy network that no matter how well-intentioned by some individual people will end up in very mischievous uses. And we see this all over repeatedly in history. So when you can't win, run to a new corner and try and build something new.
The new quantum computers may not be a panacea for privacy, says tech specialist and former military network administrator Brad Summerall.
No, they got quantum computers coming out. And quantum computers are going to change everything, because then processing data is instantaneous, and any amount.
So this new technology that's coming down the pike is going to make surveillance and all of the things we're talking about now even worse, possibly.
Yep, a lot worse, a whole lot worse.
Do you feel that sometimes the system, just goes off on its own? It's almost rogue. You can't control it?
That's kind of what's going on now, especially with that Patriot Act still in effect. A lot of people have to understand that's what's doing the damage, is that Patriot Act.
It is new. I mean, look, money is the driver here. They've got money to do everything they want. If they want to snoop on their own people, they got money to do that. Congress is happy to appropriate money to places like NSA. But the stifling effect, now I ask you, what college graduate or PhD is going to want to come down to Washington and to subject him or herself to this kind of Stasi-type environment? I suggest to you that they're going to get a bunch of people that I'd rather not see in the high positions of our security services.
Philosophically, do we become the people that we warned others about, like the Stasi of East Germany or the KGB, or have we turned into a surveillance state?
Well, we have, but there's some good news, okay? The good news is this, that surveillance states can't operate without incredibly gifted, incredibly imaginative, incredibly smart people like Edward Snowden, okay? Now, if you only have 1 out of 100, or maybe even out of 1,000, technically proficient people like this, That's all you need to do what Edward Snowden did. So, the governments cannot operate without these very bright people. A lot of these bright people bring consciences to their expertise. As long as that's the case, and that will continue to be the case, the governments will not be able to get away with this kind of thing. So that's the good news. The bad news, of course, is they'll keep trying. And as I said before, with the executive, the legislative, and judicial branches of our government all kind of complicit in this, well, and then you have the media and the corporations and all that, it looks very much like the classic definition that Mussolini gave to fascism.
And, you know, there's still a lot more to be discovered. I mean, because of Edward Snowden, we have access to an awful lot of information about an awful lot of programs, but it's not nearly the scope of all these programs. Plus, you have so many different agencies involved now. I think there are 16 different agencies that make up the intelligence community, much less the multitude, the thousands of companies that are involved in this activity, both here in the U.S. and abroad.
Not quite everywhere. In a report, Top Secret America, the Washington Post showed that there are 854,000 contractors with top secret clearances. Since 9/11, 33 new facilities were built or are being built. That's 17 million square feet. The bottom line seems to be that everyone is in the game as a very profitable surveillance industry expands beyond the limits of government and beyond the borders of countries.
It's not a left-wing issue. It's not a right-wing issue per se. It goes on everywhere in this world. People want to know about what they don't know about.
And spy agencies play to that.
Yes.
NSA whistleblowers are hoping the public will get more engaged.
What lessons can we learn from this whole sad saga, if you will, of an agency that seems to have gone rogue but has gotten more money and more legitimacy as it goes along? What's in the future for America if this continues at this level?
A police state. That's what we're talking about. Right now, I think we're at the very beginnings of what I call police state light, because the police state tries to hide what they're doing. They're very covert about their police state activities. And they deny it, and they're lying about the fact that they do content.
What right do we have as a country to engage in mass surveillance of other nation states? We don't. Remember, the sovereign rights that are granted all human beings extends beyond just the fact that you're an American citizen. That's all human beings. There's American exceptionalism. Somehow we're immune from history. I don't think so. All empires have ended up in the dustbin of history. But see, all empires, when they realize that or subconsciously realize they can end up in the dustbins of history, tend to project, they tend to compensate. And guess what they do? They increasingly militarize themselves. And that's precisely what is happening in this country.
Let's give the last word to NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, whose daring disclosures have forced us all to reflect on the dangers of a total surveillance society and turned the American surveillance state into a political battleground.
To conclude, I'd like to remind you that even if these state surveillance programs were perfect, even if they were never abused, and even if the oversight failures that are all too common today were fixed, these programs have never been shown to be uniquely valuable in keeping us safe. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. 2 independent White House panels with complete access to classified information found that these programs had never stopped a single imminent terrorist attack in the United States. So I would argue, I would submit to you that when all 3 branches of government agree that these programs must end, it seems clear to me that they're not a legitimate defense of our freedoms, but they are in fact a clear and present danger to both them and our way of life as Americans.
America's Surveillance State was produced by Schechter of Global Vision for Press TV.